a special presentation of HBO Sports. Its history is filled with strong, charismatic personalities and fabled traditions. Its heritage is rich with tales of storied careers and dramatic marches down the fields of play. At every level of competition, it has produced legends that will remain with us forever. It's about the state of Minnesota. It's about the great moments in Minnesota sports.
Hi, I'm Mark Rosen. For 20 years, I've been covering the sports scene in Minnesota as a sportscaster in the Twin Cities, and I've had the opportunity to cover many memorable moments in the state's sports history. During the next half hour, we're going to relive some of those moments and talk about some of the people who made it happen. And what better place to start than right here at Hamline University.
On February 9th, 1895, a chapter in college athletic history was written at Hamline University as two schools took to the court for the nation's first intercollegiate basketball game, an experiment fittingly held in a Hall of Science. Invented in 1891, basketball was still evolving when a member of James Naismith's original team, Ray Kane, introduced the sport at Hamline in 1893. The landmark contest organized by Kane saw two 9-man teams take aim to fill hoops made from empty peach baskets. Hamline's foes hailed from across the river at the University of Minnesota, and on that afternoon they bested their historic hosts. Far from a rout, the uncomfortably close dimensions of the court, with its low 9-foot ceiling, kept a lid on the scoring by either team. 13 years earlier, on a different playing surface, the University of Minnesota began a tradition of football success with a 4-0 shutout of those same Hamline Pipers. In 1900, Henry Williams became Minnesota's first full-time football coach. With innovations which included the forward pass and the shift, Doc Williams brought change to the college game and success to Gopher football. 5 undefeated seasons and 8 Big Ten titles drew fans from all over the state. Few crowds rivaled that which came to Northrop Field in 1903. More than 20,000 fans packed their way in to see Minnesota battle Michigan, while those without seats were left to search for the next best view. From the sidelines, Doc Williams watched as his Gophers fought to a 6-6 tie. The effort put Minnesota on the football map, but was overshadowed by events following the game. A water jug, left behind by Michigan, was found by Minnesota's trainer, Oscar Munson. When Michigan asked for the jug to be returned, Minnesota's athletic director, Lewis Cook, told the Wolverines that they would have to win the jug back. With that, the tradition of the little brown jug was born. On the basketball court, L.J. Cook also built a tradition of success, leading Minnesota to 5 Big Ten titles. While the Gophers were beginning to make a name for themselves, the animal which first captured the hearts of Minnesotans was a horse named Dan Patch. Showcased around the country, this amazing specimen was paced by a heart twice that of a normal horse. Owned by M.W. Savage, Dan Patch was housed at the spacious International Stock Farm in Hamilton, a horse mansion featuring an indoor track for winter training. In 1906, Dan Patch awed thousands at the Minnesota State Fair when he paced the mile in 1 minute 55 seconds flat. In an era when such times were rare, this racing great finished in under 2 minutes 35 times. His legendary mark of 1:55 stood for more than 50 years. Another great Minnesota sports figure gained national attention when Tommy Gibbons of St. Paul faced Jack Dempsey for the heavyweight championship of the world on July 4th, 1923. Like his brother Mike, who won great fame as a middleweight, Tommy Gibbons practiced the art of scientific boxing, hoping to outfox rather than outbox his opponent. Gibbons avoided the champion's knockout punch for 15 rounds, and though he would eventually suffer defeat, his efforts earned him the distinction of being the first man to take Jack Dempsey the distance, a fact of little comfort to the fans in Shelby, who went broke backing the fight. Back on the gridiron, Carleton College was zeroing in on opponents in unprecedented style. The 1914-15 teams, led by players such as Stub Allison, completed back-to-back seasons undefeated and unscored upon, a feat matched only once before and never since. The following year, Carlton blanked yet another foe, the mighty University of Chicago. What began as a co-ed challenge became athletic reality when students at Gustavus Adolphus geared up for the first Women's Football Classic in 1923. The event claimed coverage in newspapers and newsreels nationwide. Suiting up in the standard equipment worn by their male counterparts, the heavies and leans prepared to do battle with just a single rule change. 3 taps on the shoulder replaced outright tackling, but in the heat of a game which ended in a 6-6 tie, manners and opponents were sometimes tossed aside. 6 years after this famed female matchup, the focus of attention on the small college scene was at St. Mary's and a halfback named Bernie Miller. In 1929, Miller engineered a one-man rout of Dubuque. In just 18 minutes, Miller scored 9 touchdowns and 3 extra points, totaling 57 of the 78 his team scored. A new era in Minnesota football began with the departure of Doc Williams in 1922. 2 years later, in their first game at Memorial Stadium, the Gophers took the field against the University of Illinois and their star running back, Red Grange. Minnesota held Grange in check and treated their fans to a 20-7 upset win over the previously unbeaten Illini. In 1927, a bruising fullback arrived at Minnesota. His name was Bronco Nagurski. Behind the running of the Bronc, the Gophers went without a loss in 1927. Nagurski would go on to capture All-American honors as a fullback and tackle before entering the NFL in 1930. In a Hall of Fame career which spanned 9 years, Nagurski led the Chicago Bears to 3 NFL titles and the league's first perfect record in 1934. At times unstoppable, his runs usually left defenders feeling the sting of Bronco's buck. Pro football made sporadic debuts in Minnesota throughout the 20s, highlighted by the Duluth Eskimos and their Hall of Fame captain, Ernie Nevers. A native of Willow River, Nevers had been an All-American under Pop Warner at Stanford, where the legendary coach had described him as a player without fault. Nevers was joined on the Eskimos by fellow Hall of Famer John V. McNally. An outstanding athlete in his days at St. John's, McNally was better known to players and fans alike as Johnny Blood. While pro football would leave Minnesota the following year, Blood remained one of the game's most feared and colorful characters. His outstanding career included 4 league championships with Green Bay and ended with Pittsburgh, where in 1938 he guided the young talent of Whizzer White.
The 1930s and 40s had some incredible sports moments of their own. But there's little argument the most compelling memories of those years were provided by the University of Minnesota football team. The plaques you see here on the wall are a testament to the Golden Gophers' dominance of the mid-30s and early 40s. An amazing 5 national championships in an 8-year span.
In 1932, an architect arrived at the University of Minnesota in the guise of a head coach. His name was Bernie Bierman. In 10 short years, he would build a level of team success that had not been seen before or since. He created Minnesota football's golden decade. From 1932 until 1941, when he left to go off to war, Bierman led the Gophers to 63 wins, 12 losses, and 5 ties. Better still if you realize that among those wins were 5 national championships, 6 Big Ten championships, and 5 undefeated seasons. The legendary sports writer Graflin Rice was quoted as saying, "My job could be much simpler in selecting the 1934 All-America team by naming the entire University of Minnesota 11, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, football teams I ever saw." The game that many say set the tone for the greatness to come took place at Pittsburgh that same year.
I think that it probably is the most important game that Minnesota has ever won, for it really put us in line for the first official national championship and was really the starter, gave the team the steam that kept Minnesota Gophers rolling for several years after that time.
Bierman's bold plan was to punt on 1st and 2nd down in order to tire out the powerful Panthers. Pitt scored at the end of the half and led 7-0, but the strategy eventually worked. 2 Minnesota fourth-quarter touchdowns led to a 13-7 final, and the Gophers went on to win the first of their 3 straight national championships. In 1935, a rivalry was born out of a near riot. Iowa fans and press were steaming about the overly rough Gopher game from the year before. To ease tensions, Governor Floyd Olson of Minnesota and Governor Clyde Herring of Iowa each offered to bet a prized hog on the outcome. When the Gophers won 13-6, Herring sent a pig to Minnesota. Its name was Floyd of Rosedale, and a statue has become the winner's prize every year since. While Minnesota's golden decade under Bierman ended with 2 more national championships in 40 and 41, his huge success as a coach is probably best remembered by the players he helped mold. All-Americans like Pug Lund, the Gophers' leading rusher 3 straight seasons. Tackle Ed Whitseth, team captain in 36. Lineman Leo Namalini, who went on to a Hall of Fame career with the 49ers. And everybody's favorite, the great Bruce Smith, the Heisman Trophy winner in 1941, and arguably the best football player the university ever produced. All were classic examples of the excellence constructed by master coach Bernie Bierman, who guided Minnesota to 93 wins in 16 seasons. There was fine play being exhibited on the university's hardwood floor as well. In 1937, the Gophers were Big Ten co-champions, and 12 years later, members included a young Bud Grant and 2-time team MVP Whitey Skoog, who remembers his teammates' skills as if they had played together yesterday.
I enjoyed very much playing with Bud Grant. Bud was a very intelligent athlete. He did not make many mistakes, very competitive. And at 6'3", he played what today we call power forward in the Big Ten, and that's not easy to do at 6'3", yet he was one of the very best power forwards in the Big Ten at that time.
Many considered Whitey, a 1951 All-American, the best player in school history. Another U of M standout was 3-time NCAA discus champion Fortune Gordine, who captained the Golden Gophers to their only NCAA track and field championship in 1948. He would go on to capture a silver and a bronze medal as a member of 3 U.S. Olympic teams. On the high school front, Eveleth was beginning a streak of its own. In 1948, the Golden Bears won the first of 4 straight hockey titles, led by Willard Eichala and John Mayasich. Mayasich would go on to star at the University of Minnesota in the 50s, while Eichala would help lead the United States to a silver medal at the 56 Olympics. Even before Eichala, Eveleth was producing quality netminders and became known as Goalie Town, USA. At one point during the late 30s, 3 of the starting 6 goalies in the National Hockey League came from the small northern town of 5,000. In 1930, Minnesota was host to a famous outdoor event. Golf's U.S. Open was played that year at Interlochen Country Club in Hopkins. 28-year-old Bobby Jones won the championship for the 4th and final time, making a birdie on the final hole in a year in which he won all 4 of golf's major titles. One of the greatest female golfers to ever play the game was from Minnesota. LPGA Hall of Famer Patty Berg was born in Minneapolis, attended the University of Minnesota, and prior to the age of 22, had amassed 29 amateur titles, among them the 1938 U.S. Amateur. After turning professional in 1940, she went on to record 57 victories, 16 of them in major championships, including the inaugural Women's U.S. Open in 1946. The following year, professional basketball made its way to Minneapolis with the help of a young local sports writer named Sid Hartman. Along with 2 other investors, Hartman purchased a franchise for $15,000, hired 31-year-old John Kundla to coach the new team called the Lakers, and helped acquire the key ingredient, 6-foot 9-inch center George Mikan. Mikan proceeded to lead the Lakers to the National Basketball League championship that first year. The strategy was simple. Teammates like guard Jim Pollard were to get the ball inside to the big man. He'd do the rest. Mikan ended the season with 1,195 points in 56 games, almost double the old record.
There wasn't any doubt about it. He was the greatest center that ever played basketball up until that time. And he dominated that position throughout the whole league.
The following season, the Lakers were part of the Basketball Association of America, but it was the same old story. Fancy teamwork and 28 points a game from Mikan led them to their 2nd consecutive championship. That same year on the collegiate level, Hamline University in St. Paul won its 2nd NAIA basketball title of the decade. They had won in 1942 and would win again in 1951, and the man at the helm throughout was Joe Hutton. Two of Joe's better-known players were his son Joe Jr. and Vern Mickelson, who would go on to star for years with the Lakers. But it was Joe Sr. who had built Hamlin into the small college power that it was. Interestingly, he was the first man approached to coach the Lakers 2 years earlier, but he had declined due to a strong sense of loyalty to Hamlin and his players.
The players eventually, when they graduated from Hamlin, became his best friends. Some of those players from the 30s and the 40s continued to come to his house, you know, after they were married. It was an incredible relationship with the players that he had, and that lasted, fortunately for him, that lasted his whole lifetime.
When Joe Hutton finally retired in 1965, his 34-year record was 588 wins, 186 losses.
It was during the 50s and 60s when the state of Minnesota became committed to professional sports in a big way. I'll never forget driving out to the old Met with my dad to watch Killebrew and Oliva, Tarkenton and Marshall. It was a very special time for Minnesota sports fans, but times change. We said goodbye to the old Met after a Vikings game in December of 1981. And several years later, it was replaced by the largest mall in the country. It's sad, but all that remains of the old ballpark is a reminder of where home plate used to be.
When the cemented Met Stadium was first poured in 1955, hopes were high that the crowds of Major League Baseball would soon fill the stands. But those who packed the park for its opening the following April came to cheer the team which first brought baseball to Minneapolis, their minor league Millers. Together with their Cross River rivals, the St. Paul Saints, the Minneapolis Millers established minor league baseball as a sporting staple in the Twin Cities during the first half of this century. Each team captured 9 pennants in their 59 years as members of the American Association. Names like Hauser and Harris were well known to the fans, who poured into Nicollet and Lexington parks to see them play. From within these comfortable confines, fans witnessed the launching of some of this game's most brilliant careers. The paths of many of baseball's greats crossed in the holiday doubleheaders between the Millers and Saints. New intensity was added in the late 40s when the two teams joined one of baseball's most spirited rivalries as the respective farm teams of New York Giants and Brooklyn Dodgers. 19 of baseball's best made stops in the Twin Cities on their way to Cooperstown, but by 1960, all had said so long. In the 1950s, the center stage of professional sports still belonged to the Minneapolis Lakers. An influx of native Minnesotans were now pacing the Lakers. 3 of Joe Hutton's Hamlin stars, headed by Vern Mickelson, joined the University of Minnesota's Whitey Scoob in helping the Lakers capture their 6th league championship in 7 years. The league's marquee man continued to be Mikan, whose unparalleled performance earned him the title as the greatest player of the first half of the century. Following his departure in 1954, much of the scoring and leadership burden fell on the shoulders of Mickelson, whose career totals for points, rebounds, and games played place him among the top 10 in Laker history.
I was kind of the senior member of the team, and Elgin Baylor was this rookie that came in. And John Kundla, he kind of took me aside and says, "Hey, now you got to take this kid Baylor and show him the ropes." And I says, "Hey, teaching Baylor about basketball is like teaching Picasso how to paint."
While Baylor's career as a Laker was just getting started, the team's 13-year stay in Minneapolis was coming to a close. In 1960, after a glorious reign atop the sports scene in Minnesota, the Lakers moved to Los Angeles.
The conditions in which we put a team together are just absolutely antique or obsolete.
For John Mariucci, the answer to assembling a strong hockey team always began in his own backyard. An All-American at the University of Minnesota in the 1940s, Mariucci devoted much of his life to developing the American-born hockey player. Throughout his 13 years as coach at Minnesota, Mariucci sought homegrown talent to lead his Gophers to 3 appearances in the NCAA Final Four. Off the ice, the glory days of Gopher football had resurfaced in the form of a golden halfback from Winona, named Paul Giel.
I had followed the Gophers so much as a youngster, and I had one hero in particular. His name was Bruce Smith. He played on the 1941 National Championship team. I used to imitate, Bruce Smith as a kid out in the street. And I always wanted to go to Minnesota, so I gave up the chance to go into professional baseball right away because I wanted to see if I could make it academically, athletically at the university and play both football and baseball.
And make it he did. A 2-time All-American, Giel was named the Big Ten's most valuable player in back-to-back seasons. In 1953, Giel powered the Gophers to their first victory over Michigan in 10 years.
Giel passes for the touchdown.
Giel was also an ace on the mound, where he recorded more strikeouts than any pitcher in Gopher history. Giel was one of many All-Americans to take the field for the Chief, Dick Siebert. A Minnesota baseball legend, Siebert guided the Gophers to more than 750 victories. In 1956, Minnesota captured its first national championship, a thrill Siebert teams would repeat in 1960 and 64. Siebert remained the symbol of excellence in Gopher baseball for 31 years before passing away in 1978. The period also saw a number of individuals distinguish themselves in competition outside the state. In tennis, Jeannie Arth teamed with Darlene Hard to capture 3 major doubles championships. Arth's victory at Wimbledon in 1959 was the first ever by a Minnesotan and remained the state's lone claim to a lawn tennis title for nearly 3 decades. In 1960, several of Minnesota's finest sticks helped to carve a place in Winter Olympic history. Entering the games at Squaw Valley as heavy underdogs to the more powerful Canadian and Russian squads, the U.S. team announced the arrival of an American brand of hockey with a series of stunning upsets to capture the gold medal. The victory was the first ever by an American team and was headed by the efforts of 8 men from the North Star State. 1 month later, the state was again in shock when first-year coach Richard Olson and his Edgerton Flying Dutchman completed a perfect 27-0 season by capturing the state basketball championship.
Right now, it's hard to believe. Yes, sir. 27 in a row. We're finally finished.
This is quite a year for you. The freshman year of coaching, you won the state championship undefeated. I don't know. This must be the greatest thing ever happened to you.
Greatest thing that happened to me. Yes. A great bunch of guys did it.
Their small school miracle ensured Edgerton one of the largest places in state high school history. A new chapter in Minnesota football history was added in 1960 when Murray Warmath took the Gophers from worst to first in the Big Ten and their 6th national championship. Powered by a defensive line that included Outland Trophy winners Tom Brown and Bobby Bell, Minnesota shut down its traditional Big Ten rivals and earned a berth in the 1961 Rose Bowl against Washington. Plagued by early turnovers, which allowed the Huskies to jump in front 17-0 during the first half, Minnesota was unable to recover despite a strong second-half effort. In a return visit to Pasadena the following year, the Gophers squared off against UCLA. All-American quarterback Sandy Stevens scored 2 touchdowns and ran Warmath's split-tee offense to perfection as Minnesota rolled over the Bruins 21-3. For Warmath, who was later named Coach of the Year, the experience was unforgettable.
If there's ever been anything that I got a bigger thrill out of in athletics than winning the national championship and our Rose Bowl experiences, I don't know what it was.
The attention of Minnesota football fans was taken in a new direction with the arrival of the Minnesota Vikings in 1961, who took the field for their NFL debut against the Chicago Bears. Trailing early in the game, Coach Norm Van Brocklin called on a rookie quarterback from Georgia to replace starter George Shaw. The young Tarkenton responded, throwing 4 touchdown passes to lead the Vikings past the Bears. But the opening day excitement would prove to be short-lived as the Vikes dropped their next 7 games. Much of the sporting world's attention in the fall of 1961 was focused on a long ball slugger from Hibbing named Roger Maris, who was bearing down on one of baseball's greatest records. Needing just 1 home run to break the legendary mark set by Babe Ruth back in 1927, Maris delivered, sending a shot into the right field seats at Yankee Stadium. The blow came off of Red Sox pitcher Tracy Stallard on the last day of the season and marked the 61st time that Maris had rounded the bases that year. His unmatched record remains one of the game's most notable achievements. The year 1961 also marked the long-awaited arrival of Major League Baseball to Minnesota, as owner Calvin Griffith brought his Washington Senators to the Twin Cities. In their season opener, the Twins traveled to New York to face the defending American League champions. Against Yankee ace Whitey Ford, the Twins broke a scoreless game open in the 7th on Bob Allison's solo home run. The shot proved to be all the insurance Minnesota would need, as Twins pitcher Pedro Ramos held the Yankees in check with a 3-hit shutout. Allison's mighty bat and sparkling defense were twin fixtures in the club's early years, as was the reliable play of catcher Earl Batty, who led the team in batting in 1961. On the mound, Jack Kralik recorded the Twins' first no-hitter in 1962. But the man who gave the club its pace and punch was the Twins' own killer, Hrbek and Puckett. His towering blast reached the seats at Metropolitan Stadium with awesome regularity. The league's top rookie in 1964 was the Twins' Tony Oliva, who won batting titles in each of his first 2 seasons. In just 4 years since their arrival in Minnesota, the Twins had risen to the top of the American League. Winners of 102 games, the Twins prepared to meet Los Angeles in the 1965 World Series. After capturing the opener, the Twins sent lefty Jim Cott to match Sandy Koufax in Game 2. Thanks in part to a rally-ending catch by Bob Allison in the 5th inning, Cott bested the Dodger ace as the Twins took a 2-game lead to Los Angeles. 3 losses later, with the Twins facing elimination, the series returned to Met Stadium. Jim Mudcat Grant, the Twins' winning pitcher in Game 1, provided his own offensive support in Game 6, belting a 3-run home run that helped force a 7th game. In the deciding game, the Dodger pitching, which had been their strength throughout the season, finally resurfaced as Sandy Koufax tossed a 3-hit shutout to give the Dodgers the series. The decade of arrival for professional sports in Minnesota closed with yet another edition in 1967, when the Minnesota North Stars became one of 5 new teams to join the National Hockey League. The colorful antics of goalie Lorne Gump Worsley, who fearlessly took opponent shots head-on, were matched by the skillful skating of North Star great Bill Goldsworthy. Together, they paced a hockey franchise whose success was limited in its early years.
The growing pains that professional sports went through in the 60s gave way to more settling times in the 70s and 80s. The franchises were now expected to win, not just exist. The team that filled many, but not all the fans' expectations, wore purple and white and played on Sundays.
4 days before the decade of the 70s began, Joe Kapp led the Vikings to what many said was the biggest win in their history to that point, a 23-20 victory over the Rams. Kapp's leap over defender Jim Nettles for the go-ahead touchdown propelled them towards Super Bowl IV. January 11th, 1970. The opponents, the Kansas City Chiefs, who stuffed Viking runners like Bill Brown all day long. Minnesota would wind up with a scant 67 total yards on the ground. A short Dave Osborne TD run at the beginning of the second half was all the scoring the Vikings could muster. While a disconsolate Kapp was knocked out of action in the fourth quarter, counterpart Len Dawson was directing a superb game plan in a 23-7 rout.
We dominated that football game. We even pulled in the strings in the second half, making sure that we didn't make any mistakes or cough up the football, or that score would have been a lot better for Kansas City.
2 years later, Fran Tarkenton returned to Minnesota and in 1974 led the Vikings to Super Bowl VIII. Unfortunately, the Miami Dolphins were there waiting. Tarkenton was a marked man from the beginning, as the Dolphins controlled the line of scrimmage from the outset. This dominance up front also allowed backs Jim Kick and Larry Zonka to find the cracks they needed all afternoon. While Viking runners like Chuck Foreman found the going difficult against the spirited Dolphin defense, Zonka powered his way to 145 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns in leading Miami to a 24-7 victory. The following year, the Vikings were once again back at the big one, this time against Pittsburgh and their famed defense, led by number 75, Mean Joe Green. If Minnesota's offensive output had been weak in Super Bowl VIII, this one would be anemic. A Tarkenton safety gave the Steelers a 2-0 lead and the only points of the first half. The Vikings' only score came courtesy of a Matt Blair block punt, which Terry Brown recovered in the end zone. From there on out, it was all Steelers. Franco Harris's 158 yards rushing was 141 more than all Minnesota runners combined, and Pittsburgh won it 16-6. In January of 1977, the Vikings made it to their 4th Super Bowl of the decade against the Raiders and their field general, Ken Stabler. The frustration continued as Oakland rolled up a team record 429 yards of total offense. Under a constant rush, Tarkenton had another disappointing afternoon. One of his 3 interceptions was returned by veteran Oakland cornerback Willie Brown 75 yards for a touchdown to ice the game. Big play receiver Fred Biletnikoff, who caught 4 key passes for 79 yards, was named game MVP. The final score, Oakland 32, Minnesota 14.
A lot of people ask me and say, well, you lost 4 Super Bowls. Doesn't that bother you? I don't know that my life would be a one bit difference if we'd have won 4 Super Bowls. Nothing would have changed at all. Coached where I wanted to coach, lived where I wanted to live, do the things that I wanted to do in the place I wanted to do them.
Baseball claimed its share of special moments. Jim Perry won the Twins' first Cy Young Award in 1970. On August 10th of '71, Hrbek Killebrew hit the 500th home run of his career. He belted 73 more before retiring 3 years later. Maybe the best hitter the Twins ever had was Rod Carew. He won all 7 of his batting titles during his 12-year career with Minnesota. In 1977, he even climbed above 400 in his run at the elusive average. He'd end the season, though, at 388. In every sense, a true Hall of Famer.
When you're next to the likes of, Babe Ruth and Jackie Robinson and Ty Cobb and some of the greats, there's a little kid from Panama that came all the way over and made it.
In 1970, Minnesota once again hosted the U.S. Open, this time at Hazeltine in Chaska. The wind was a factor early on, but in the end, England's Tony Jacklin outlasted American Dave Hill to capture his second major championship. Cindy Nelson was born in Lutzen, Minnesota, and was born to ski. She started at the age of 2, made her first junior national team at the age of 12, and competed in her first World Cup race at 16. Named to 4 Olympic teams, Cindy's best finish was a bronze at Innsbruck in 1976. The 70s saw a successful reign of basketball at the University of Minnesota. From 71 to 75, Coach Bill Musselman led the Gophers to a combined record of 69-32 and a Big Ten championship in 72. During the latter part of the decade, 2 who shined brightest were 3-time MVP Michael Thompson, who remains the university's all-time leading scorer, and Kevin McHale, 2-time MVP and Boston Celtics star ever since. Another Golden Gopher whose record still stands is running back Ken Kitzman. Even more, it still stands as an all-time NCAA record. On November 12, 1977, Kitzman carried 57 times against Illinois in a 21-0 victory. Heralded coach Herb Brooks guided the University of Minnesota hockey team to 3 NCAA championships between 1972 and 1979. After playing for the Gophers during the late 50s, it was now his turn to rally the troops and lead through inspiration.
A lot of you people are really on the threshold of joining a very select fraternity. A fraternity of ex-Minnesota hockey players, someone that's going to wear that M. There's nothing in your life that you'll find more proud, gentlemen. Let's get ready to go. Come on.
One of Brooks' standouts was Rousseau native Neil Broughton, the first recipient of the Hobey Baker Award in 1981, honoring collegiate hockey's best player. In 1979, Broughton scored 71 points in 40 games as a freshman under Brooks, and then took a year off to become a member of the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team. There, he was once again united with Brooks, who served as the team's coach. That team will forever be remembered for its upset victory over the thought-to-be invincible Soviets in the semifinals. That game and the subsequent win over the Finns have provided many with unforgettable images of awe and joy and pride. The impossible had become the miracle, and to think 13 of Brooks' players came from the state of Minnesota.
I told him at the time he was going to be the Olympic coach, I said, why do you want to do that? I mean, the Czechs, the Swedes, I don't think the pros can beat the Russians. Why do you want to do that when you had all these honors right here? I said, it's impossible. He said, I just think I can do it.
In March of 1980, New York Mills' Janet Carvinen finished her high school career as the state's all-time leading scorer. She had scored more than any Minnesota male or female high school player ever, and the record would stand for over a decade. Willard John Eichela won the last of his 8 state championships at Edina in 1988. This Minnesota hockey legend would step down from coaching following the 90-91 season after 33 years and 616 wins.
Who's on it? Come on, Chris!
A celebration would take place on September 6, 1980. Macalester College in St. Paul won a football game in the final 15 seconds by a field goal. No big deal until you consider that Macalester had not won in 6 years. The longest losing streak in NCAA history came to an end after 50 straight losses with a 17-14 win over Mount Scenario. On the professional front, a Hail Mary pass thrown by Tommy Kramer in December of '80 is bobbled, fought for, and finally caught by the Vikings' Ahmad Rashad for a game-winning touchdown against the Browns. The 28-23 thriller puts Minnesota into the NFC playoffs temporarily. In May of '81, the North Stars made it to the Stanley Cup Finals for the first time by defeating the Calgary Flames. Rookie Neil Broughton was brought up late in the season and has been with the North Stars ever since. It was those first few games that gave him his confidence.
We went to Boston Garden and we hadn't won in there in, I don't know, such a long time, but we went 2 straight in there, and then we come home and beat them, and then we kind of got our confidence, got on a roll. We went to Buffalo and did well there, and then we beat Calgary, and then we got beat by the Islanders, which had an awesome hockey team, and just ignited my career, I think.
Now in his 13th season, Broughton has held his share of records at every level of hockey.
Here's Hartsburg, now to Broughton again. Centers it for Bukestad, shot and a goal! Broughton has his 100th point!
Neil Broughton becomes the first American in history to hit 100 points.
Swimmer Tracy Calkins from Winona won 48 U.S. national titles between 1978 and '84, more than any other swimmer. Then at the '84 Olympic Games in Los Angeles, she set 5 world records on her way to 3 gold medals. Arguably, Minnesotans' favorite memory of the '80s was the Twins' Homer Hankey World Series victory over the Cardinals in '87. The good times began with Dan Gladden's 4th inning grand slam in Game 1 at the Dome. They continued with another win in Game 2, but then the fun stalled. Games 3 through 5 were played in St. Louis. After a 3-run homer by light-hitting Tom Lawless in Game 4 and a critical error by Twins shortstop Greg Gagne in Game 5, Minnesota finally found itself back at home, down 3-2. Out came the Hankies, and in Game 6, Bloomington native Kent Hrbek responded with a 6th inning grand slam to even the series. In Game 7, Greg Gagne beat out a 2-out grounder to third, allowing the eventual winning run to score. It was then up to series MVP Frank Viola to shut the door and preserve the Twins' first world championship ever. The fans loved it.
I'm pleased to announce that the Board of Governors of the National Basketball Association has decided that it will expand the National Basketball Association by 4.
One of those 4 teams was the Minnesota Timberwolves. After a 30-year absence, professional basketball was finally back in Minnesota. On November 10th, 1989, victory number 1 at home.
2 seconds, 1 second, go crazy, Bulls win.
It is, without a doubt, the most recognizable sporting facility in the state, the Hubert H. Humphrey Metrodome. Not long ago, the Twin Cities were considered the sports capital of the world. In a period of less than a year, beginning in May of '91, the state hosted everything from the Stanley Cup Finals to the Final Four. And at the center of all this excitement was this 10-year-old structure.
Who hit mostly boards.
Minnesota's duties as host actually began at the Met Center in May of '91.
Works it by Graham, puts it in the right corner for Prop. Around behind to Gagne, centered at the Bellows, he scores!
After beating Chicago, the North Stars made it to the finals for the second time, but the Pittsburgh Penguins smiled last, winning the Cup 4-2. Next up, Hazeltine would host the U.S. Open for the second time in 20 years. An 18-hole playoff between Payne Stewart and Scott Simpson helped provide the dramatics. But when Simpson found the water on 17, the outcome was all but set. All that remained was for Stewart to play it safe, and that he did to win by 2. Next in order was the annual Fall Classic at the Dome. A Greg Gagne 3-run shot was the big blow in Game 1. After Scott Leas's 8th-inning homer in Game 2, the Twins headed to Atlanta up 2-0, much to the chagrin of the Braves' Tom Glavine. But Atlanta was ready and waiting with their tomahawks ready to chop. A Mark Lemke 12th inning hit in Game 3 scored Dave Justice with the winning run on a close play at the plate. When the Braves won Games 4 and 5 as well, the Twins had to wonder if their bubble was about to burst. There was one saving grace. They were headed back home. Hrbek and Puckett's 11th inning home run in Game 6 answered the call. And when Gene Larkin stroked his 10th inning single in Game 7 to score Gladden to win it 1-0, that was it. Deja vu? The Twins win them all at home, and a Minnesota pitcher collects the series MVP. This time, it was Jack Morris.
I think people have to realize that was one of the better series I've ever played, going extra innings in the last game. I'm shot. I'm dead.
For days afterwards, the crowds begged for curtain calls. The Metrodome then played host to Super Bowl 26, where the Redskins beat the Bills in January of '92, and then to the NCAA Final Four in April of '92, where Duke beat Michigan. Quite a sporting run for the Twin Cities. In 1990, the University of Minnesota advanced farther than it ever had in the NCAA tournament, behind the leadership of Kevin Lynch and Willie Burton. When the Gophers just missed out on a trip to the Final Four by losing to Georgia Tech by 2, Coach Clem Haskins had to feel proud. In 1991, Dina Kangas of Minnesota Duluth became the state's all-time collegiate scoring leader, man or woman. Her career point total, 2,810. High schooler Joe McDonald also set a new state career scoring mark. By the end of his senior year at Chisholm in 1991, he had totaled 3,292 points. There's no coach quite like St. John University's John Gallardi. After 40 years of coaching, he has amassed just short of 300 victories with a unique style. No scholarships, no hitting in practice, no whistles. The focus is on fun and flawless execution. He's small college football's all-time winningest coach. After 50 years in racing, 92-year-old Minnesotan Frances Genter finally had the winner she longed for. Despite failing eyesight, she attended the Kentucky Derby in May of 1990 to witness her colt, Unbridled, win the 116th run for the Roses. Greg LeMond is one of the few Medina residents who's known as well in Europe as he is at home. In July of 1990, he won the world's most prestigious bike race, the Tour de France, for an unprecedented third time. And finally, in June of '92, the Minnesota Timberwolves took a major step towards improving their future by signing Duke star Christian Laettner with their first pick in the NBA draft.
So there they are, some of the classic moments and personalities in Minnesota sports history. But which do you think were the greatest? We've asked Minnesota sports writers and broadcasters to rank their favorites. And here now are their top picks. At number 10, Major League Baseball comes to Minnesota as the Twins begin their inaugural season in 1961. At number 9, the Vikings' career of Hall of Fame quarterback Fran Tarkenton. At number 8, the Twins' career of the great home run slugger Harmon Killebrew. At number 7, the legendary defensive stalwarts known as the Purple People Eaters. At number 6, the spectacular 12-year career of the Twins' all-time batting leader, Rod Carew. At number 5, the University of Minnesota's back-to-back Rose Bowl appearances in 1961 and 1962. At number 4, the great Minneapolis Lakers' 5 world championships between 1949 and 1954. At number 3, Bernie Bierman's golden decade as head coach at the University of Minnesota. At number 2, the Bud Grant era with the Vikings and their 4 Super Bowl appearances. And finally, at number 1, 3 trips to the World Series by the Twins, highlighted by the championships in 1987 and 1991. We hope you've enjoyed this look back at some of the greatest moments in Minnesota sports. Maybe the best is yet to come. I'm Mark Rosen.
I'm extremely excited to be the head coach of Minnesota Vikings. Look forward to playing some fantastic football. I know we have some tremendous talent on this football team. We've had some great years in the 80s, and we're looking forward to having some championship years in the 90s.
Our Stars are 28 seconds away from beating the NHL's best team and sending them out of the playoffs after 6 games and doing it in front of a sold-out Met Center crowd.
How about that? How's that look? Been waiting for that a long time. I have. All right. How's that look?
Hockey. Coming out of there is Thompson. He's got some running room. Look out. He could break it. He could break it. 45. He's to the 40. To the 30. 20. This will be 98 yards. Touchdown.
This has been a presentation of HBO Sports, the network of champions.